All right. So welcome to this video on the data management toolbox of the Pedestrian Infrastructure Assessment Toolkit. So what's included in this? There's a create geodatabase tool that is included, an import to geodatabase tool that's included, and these tools give you the flexibility to create your own geodatabases structured to work with the PIAT, to import your own layers, and to update existing layers. Um, if you plan to use the geodatabases and layers provided with the PIAT, then your use of this toolbox will likely be limited. So that's important to keep in mind. So here are a few examples of why you might want to use the Create Geodatabase tool. One is to do analysis for different data sets and keep them separate instead of overwriting them. Another is to work with a copy of the PIAT geodatabases while leaving the original PIAT databases as is. And then finally, another reason is to address a case where the PIAT geodatabases have become corrupted. The import to geodatabase tool, you'll need to use this tool if one or more of the following apply. One is if you want to prioritize pedestrian infrastructure improvement locations based on certain factors, specifically opportunities, constraints, and stakeholder input. Those factors have variables in them that require um, local project specific data. So that's data that you need to provide and need to import. Another reason is if you'd prefer to use a locally derived layer instead of the layer provided with the PIAT, then you would update it using or upload it using this tool. Um, and then finally, if you'd like to replace a layer that has been provided with the PIAT with a more up-to-date version of the same layer from the same source, then you would use this tool as well. And now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Thaja, to go through a demonstration of how this toolbox works.
Thank you. So I already have a project set up here to kind of work with our toolbox. What I'll do is you can create a project in your ArcGIS Pro environment and kind of run the tools and everything. I will actually remove the connection that I had before and show you how to add the tools, the whole toolkit again to your database. So for that, you would need to be in the catalog pane here, which I already have on the side. If you don't have that open, then you can access it in the view uh, tab here, and in that there's this catalog option. And when you click on that, this pane opens up. And within the pane, you will see something called folders, and that is where you keep different folder connections on your project. And you can right click on it and select Add New Folder Connections. So that allows you to add new folder connections, and the folder that you want to add, which contains the PIAT and like pre-populated data, is this BMC pedestrian infrastructure assessment resources here. So that's the one that you add, and that appeared here right now. And if you double click it, or if you click on this little arrow next to it, it has more folders in it. And the toolkit is basically housed in this folder called BMC Pedestrian Infrastructure Assessment Toolkit folder. So when you expand on it, there are 3 files with this little toolbox symbol with an extension .pyt. Those are the different toolboxes within the tool. And the first one here is the data management toolbox, which is what we're covering right now. And we'll cover the needs and prioritization toolboxes after this video. So this toolbox has 2 tools, which Jim described in his presentation. The first is the Create Database tool, and this is what you would use to create your own database. And in like I mentioned, we will already have a pre-populated standard and Scratch geodatabases for you to use with. And these are the databases that basically the PIAT tool does all the processing. It's like the workspace of the tool and all of the tools as well. So you can use a pre-populated one, in which case you won't need to use this create database tool. But if you do want to use that tool, what it does when you create it, when you click on it, it has one input. You just need to specify at what location do you want to create it. So when you browse to it, this opens up a new location here. It opens up like a regular browser window. And for example, what I'll do is I'll actually create a new folder and name it demo test. And now I select that demo test folder and hit OK. And this is where it's running it. And you can see the full path in here. And when you hit run, this will essentially create two standard geodatabases. I'll kind of show you the output of what it looks like when the tool finishes running. And this usually takes a few seconds to run, maybe a minute or two if your computer is occupied. So it's already done. And it has this little green check mark and a green button here that is essentially telling you that it's done. And in order to see where it is, let's so where we saved it is that in this PIAT webinar folder, we created a folder called demo test. And if you go into that, you'll notice there is a file. There's a folder here which says pet underscore infra underscore strd underscore gdb with this numbers next to it. These numbers, the 2023 01 26 is basically today's date. And you might actually have noticed that I have other folders here that use the same thing. That's because those are the folders that I created while I was testing for this demo. So, but the one that we just created right now is this one, and it has two geodatabases, this GDB. One is called standardized and one is the Scratch. Standardized is the geodatabase where all the layers, tables that you might want to import will be housed. And the Scratch is basically a temporary workspace where all the intermediate layers, temporary layers, etc., will be stored. And right now, if you expand on it, they're empty. If I'm clicking on it, there's nothing in here. That's because we just created it and they're empty. But let's say you want to start populating it with the data that you need so that you can do further analysis using the other tools, then that's where the second tool comes into play. So let's go back to the toolkit, and this is the import to geodatabase tool. So we select that, and you essentially what this tool enables you to do is enables you to import different types of layers to this standard geodatabase that you've just created. Whether those, what type of layers they are, what list is dependent, it's entirely up to you. And there's a standard list of layers that the toolbox can accept, and those are all given as a drop-down list here. And the more details on what format they take, what type of layers they are, is all in the manual. And what this tool does is that you select a given type of layer. So for example, I'm selecting traffic signals as my main layer. And I already have traffic signals layer pulled up here for this demo. So I will be selecting traffic signals. And I'll still need to select this folder where we have created it before. So if you go, which is in the demo test folder, and this is the folder that was created in the previous step, and you select that, and that's okay. So when you run this, what it does is that it basically does a sequence of validation checks. So it kind of tells the user, it has a series of messages that kind of tell like where the tool is at, and if the layer meets all of the validation checks. For example, is it of the right type? Is it the point type? Because traffic signals layer should be a points type. And if it requires any particular attributes, does it have those attributes? If it doesn't have it, then it fails the validation checks and you have an error message that pops up here. And in this case, it met all the validation checks. So it added it to the particular geodatabase as a layer, and it said you get the success message here. So let's go back to this layer, and if you notice, this is what we created earlier, and earlier it was empty, but let's refresh this. When you refresh this, there's the traffic signals layer, which is the layer that we just uploaded. But let's do another layer, but this time I'll intentionally add, I'll intentionally pick an option that's going to give me an error just to show you what an error message looks like. So you would go pick this and pick the same folder as before. And this time for standard layer, what I will do is I will pick pedestrian network, and then select my layer feature cluster input as traffic signals. Clearly, traffic signals layer is not pedestrian network, and it's a point type, so it doesn't meet the requirements of pedestrian network. So if we were to run this, right away it gave me an error. So if we were to look at it, so first thing is it's showing is that this error message it's printing is that it does not have the right kind of attributes. That's because the pedestrian network requires a couple of different attributes, and this particular layer does not have it. Now, so that's one of the error messages that you might see. To kind of show you a different error message that you might notice, I will pick, let's look at functional classification, or actually let's pick traffic signals again. This time it is the correct layer, but if I run it again, there will still be an error, and I'll show you what the error message is. The reason it'll give you an error this time is that we already uploaded that layer ahead of time, and the tool does not automatically overwrite it. So in this case, it's saying this table already exists. Please delete it or select another layer. So this is one of the other validation checks that it does, is to make sure that if the layer already exists ahead of time, it gives you an error rather than overwriting it. And if you still want to overwrite it, the way to do that would be in the catalog pane itself. You would go to that particular layer, and then you would delete it explicitly. And once it's deleted, you can rerun the tool to upload a newer layer. You would need to only do this if you are trying to update an existing layer with something that might be more recent or something that you might have done more updates to. So that's the import geodatabase tool. And I think that covers those two particular tools.
Yeah, so Phaedra, I just wanted I had a question and a clarification. One is I just wanted to make sure that people are aware that they have to go through this, if they're importing layers, they have to go through the process of selecting the standard layer and the data layer that they want to import each time for
Yes,
each layer.
correct.
And then, so for somebody who is going to be using the data that is provided with the PIAT, what layers would they need to import? Under what circumstances would they need to import any layers?
Yeah, so let me show you a snapshot of what a completely pre-populated tool, the standard geodatabase looks like. This is this one right here is something that we've already pre-populated, and this is the one that we'll be sharing with the with you all when we deliver this tool. And this already has a bunch of layers, but one thing to note is that there are some variables that are not in this layer, and those are more project specific ones. Let's say for prioritization, you're trying to add, say, cost information, and cost information is very much project specific and not something that we can pre-populate ahead of time. And if you want to use that variable in prioritization, then that's a custom data set that you will need to input on your own. And that particular, just to give you, we don't have a data set to import for that, but just to give you an indication on what that looks like. So if I were to select cost as my variable, this changes to Excel workbook instead of the layer that we saw before. That's because these custom layers are, they come in the form of Excel workbooks. You would basically need to create an Excel workbook that identifies the cost of each of the projects that you're trying to prioritize. and populate it with the right values. And the exact formatting requirements and everything is in the manual. And you would select that particular Excel workbook and the corresponding worksheet, and then you would import it. So that's when you would use this pre-populated layer, which all pre-populated geodatabase, which comes with a bunch of layers, but not those project-specific ones.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that, and that kind of gets back to a comment that I made earlier about the opportunities, constraints, and stakeholder engagement factors. The variables that are within those factors are these Excel tables that you have to upload.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much.